Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be looking at some of the behind the scenes in Mianite highlight animations I've done over the past few months. I wasn't really going to do a behind the scenes for them just because they're really short and pretty simple. They're done in a really short period of time, so there isn't really a lot to go over, but people have been asking about it, and now there's a few to look at, so worth making a video of. And before we get started, I just want to thank you guys for the awesome feedback on my videos in general, but especially with these highlight animations. I read through all the comments and they're all super positive. I can't even think of a negative comment, and that's not to say I don't mind a little creative or constructive criticism. But yeah, you guys have really been awesome with these videos. So we'll start with the rig I've been using for most of these. After the Find the Pieces video, working on that, which is awesome. I learned a ton from it, especially picking apart the rig used, and there's a lot I learned, and so I figured it's probably time to make a new rig. If you looked at my last one, if we go ahead and start, the mesh on this one is a lot less dense. I decided to go with I kept with the smoother look because I like that. I went with a harder elbow. It's still smoothish, but it's a little bit harder than or a lot of bit harder actually than the old one here. And then these the same. I also added the limbs where they can stretch, and they actually can stretch for infinity if I. Whoa! Just for the legs though. That way I have more flexibility as far as moving. I like to be able to kind of pop the elbow here. If I go past the limit, it kind of bends backwards because that's kind of what your arm can do in real life. You can bend a little bit further than the 180. So if this limb could stretch, then it wouldn't be able to do that. So it's kind of a trade-off there. But with the stretching the legs, that gives me a lot more flexibility. The body parts are pretty similar, or pretty simple, pretty similar to the old rig. Just kind of optimization and like efficiency improvements. The big thing for me is the face. The face controls have a lot of flexibility. So the interface, I guess you could call it, looks pretty similar. I went with the same eyebrow control type as the old one. I can also scale these to widen certain areas of the eyebrow. And then the mouth is all the mouth controls over on this side. All the face or eye controls are on this side. And then the rig here, I can move the whole thing around if I want to, detach it with this world parent, and then toggle some attributes of the face. But what's really great is this face actually works off bones instead of blend shapes. So we can see if I reveal the skeleton, we can see we have bones for the mouth and the eyes, which control blinking and eye expressions and face expressions. And the way these controllers manipulate these bones are actually with locators. So let me just go in the open mouth position here. And then if I select this, I can reveal the locators that are driving that. So I go to, where is it? There we go. Turn that on. You can see these locators are what's controlling the open mouth. And I can modify these at any time. So if I one day suddenly decide that I don't like exactly how the open mouth looks, instead of if they were blend shapes, I'd have to reveal the blend shapes and then go and move the vertices around. With the system here, I can just move these locators to any position, whatever. If I want this to be open mouth, which looks kind of ridiculous now, moving this controller will move it between closed and open, and I can do that for any kind of expression. So all these moving these around are just going between presets, kind of. And then I also have a control called manual override, which just which reveals controls that are basically the same thing as the locators, the yellow locators we were just looking at, but they're more meant to be keyed and stuff if I need really precise control over the mouth. And the eyes work in the same way. These are just blinking, and all the expressions they can make are just presets of these locators. And also I added, which is pretty cool, are when he looks around, the eyes actually deform with the look of the as the character's looking around, which I think's pretty cool. So yeah, that's pretty much a quick overview of the rig I've been using. So I'm gonna go through these videos in chronological order, starting with the unstable ingots video. This was the first one where I actually used the new rig. Everything prior to this new rig I have archived away just because I don't really need to access it anymore. So getting out the Hero of Taint, which uses the old rig, and is the actual first one. Getting that out will be kind of a mess. because all the connections are going to be broken and stuff. So we'll just go ahead and start with the unstable ingots. The Hero of Taint one didn't have too much going on that we won't see in these. These highlight animations is where I started actually giving Sparkles a cape, which is dynamic end cloth. So you can see it flapping around here. Even with smooth mesh on the cape and smooth mesh on the character, it's still playing back pretty quickly, which is nice. So if I go back to this, so yeah, he plops this down. When this was rendering, actually, this citizen sigil, for some reason, even though there's one in the scene, it was actually rendering 2 at certain times. It was really weird. But if you look back in the video when he's pounding right there, at this frame, you can see there's a second one underneath it because it just duplicated a second one underneath it. After he places it, the second one appears, and I had to re-render all of this, of course, because it was apparent. But if you look in the video, I didn't have time to re-render everything, so you can still see the second one as he's jamming the iron in the thing. You can see when this pops up, there's a second one underneath it. And then after he pushes it off the table, over here, there's a second one just sitting there. For some reason, somehow it was rendering out 2. It didn't show in the viewport. There's only one in the scene, but it rendered out 2, which was super frustrating. So I had to re-render all the parts where you could see the second one, obviously. So that was really weird. I never figured it out. I just exported the whole scene and it went away. So I was like, okay, it must have been some kind of bug or something. But yeah, besides that, so yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. Just pretty much just animation. There's nothing else really going on. The ingots falling, everything is animated. The ingots here are dynamic instead to save time. I like to animate even if something needs to look like dynamic, you know, like it's falling or whatever, or bouncing around. I like to do that by hand just because I like the control I have. But having these 4 gold ingots fall dynamically saves a good bit of time, which is very good to have, good to save time because these are done in like a few days. Next we have the guard Tom video, and this sheep was made in a few minutes. It's not actually like a actual rig with bones. It's just a few objects parented together. Like I just said, these are done in a super short period of time, and more specifically during the week I have like school and work, so I don't really have time to work on these. So it really comes down to Friday evening, all day Saturday, and then doing final touches Sunday morning after it renders out overnight. So it's done in a super short period of time, so I don't really have time to make a whole sheep rig. So I just kind of threw this together with a few polygons here. But it gets the job done. I guess he's only in there for like a second or 2. So you're not going to be able to see the armor in the viewport because of the material that's on it. So, but you can see the controls kind of outlining where the body parts are. But yeah, he wakes up and looks at him. And this is done in 3 different scenes actually. So for each kind of day or entry, I guess, into the diary is a separate scene. So you can see this is just the part where he reaches for the sheep, all crazy, and then falls over in the taint. And I tried to add like the crazy googly eye kind of thing to each day or entry or whatever, just as like a character trait of guard Tom. So yeah, he falls in the taint. If I go in the next day, it shows him waking up with purple all over his face, implying that he has eaten taint. And then he pops up here again with the googly eye kind of thing. Oh, you can't really see it. There you go. The googly eye kind of thing. And then we have Firefox come in and then starts making it rain cookies. When it rendered, the cookies just stop after they fall a certain distance, simply because they're out of frame, so there's no reason to animate them. But you can actually see them in the reflections of the armor, which was like I didn't see until after it rendered, which really sucked, and I didn't really have time to fix it. I can't remember. I did something in post to kind of hide it a little bit. I can't remember exactly what I did. I might have to go back and rewatch that to look for that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure if you go back in the video and look closely, you can see the cookies kind of just floating there. But yeah, and it shows her making it rain. It shows him by the house again with his he does his little head twitches where his eye is bouncing around right there. And then she looks over, and then he hands over the diamond block. And lastly, we have him getting thrown out. The textures were doing something weird, so I just disabled those. But yeah, he gets thrown out, looks all sad, and then it shows him out in the field somewhere. There he is. And the camera kind of just pans out. So next up, we have the Prettiest Princess one, which was fun to make. It starts out with him just reading this paper. And with the part where he comes out here, let's see. It started out where he was just wearing normal pink armor, but that was kind of boring. So I went back and gave him this end cloth skirt. Let's see here. Let's see what the heck. The eyes were disappearing. There we go. And then the tiara, and I was just sitting there painting on whatever this is called in lipstick on a male Minecraft character, just a normal day, But yeah, checks himself out in the mirror. And then the part where he's flying and there's like the pink background and just flying around, it's the exact same scene. It's the same place. Why bother redoing the light setup to match and everything? I just keyed the terrain off. Where is it here? Here it is. I just keyed the terrain to turn off and then keyed this plane here to turn on, also with a spotlight to just kind of give a hot spot on the pink background there where he flies through, and then it's just keyed back. He does his prancing around here. Let's see. And then when the music disc comes down, it just is keyed to come back on. And to kind of hide that, the camera does this, jumps back. You can see it moves back real quickly. And then the focal length is keyed to jump real quick as well, to help mask the transition there. Yeah, it shows him seeing it, and then he zooms into the text, and then he goes and kicks it. Going back real quick to the part with the mirror here, I actually thought ahead, learned from my mistakes with the Guard Tom video, and I thought about what's gonna show in the reflection, and I went ahead and duplicated the terrain behind here. So this is the normal terrain. You can see the line here ends there, and then when I thought about the reflection there, it would have just been the edge of the world, and then blue would have shown in the reflection. So I went ahead and duplicated rather, the terrain in the back there. So learning from your mistakes, good stuff. So anyway, that pretty much covers it for this video. Again, another pretty straightforward. So next up is the drug bust video. This one was another fun one to make. Originally, and I still have it saved here, his eyes were actually red, and you can see better here. And the idea was, he gets up, his eyes are all red, and then he puts his sunglasses on to hide it. And that was a little bit much, so I went ahead and just went with the normal, the white eyes for that. But I guess the same still implied. When he's walking in, there's some weird stuff going on. And with the fog, for the smoke or fog, and the types of light used in the scene, the render times for this were definitely the highest of any of these. Let me hop into perspective here. The lights used are area lights, which are killer on the render. And then the fog, also the sample rate had to be, or the samples had to be pretty low on the light and the fog, just so that I could render it out in time for upload. And normal, if I were to use dynamic like fluid fog, it would have destroyed the render times. There would have been no way. So to get around that, I have this object here, and this is what's called a volume primitive. And I guess as the name implies, it's not as advanced as a fluid fog. And when you create it, it just fills the space with fog. It's not really, it doesn't cast any shadows. It's not dynamic at all, and there's no cloudiness to it. So to make it look like it's dynamic or it has some flow to it, I assigned to the transparency of it, which is just basically how thick the fog is, I assigned a 3D texture, 3D volume noise here, which is, like I said, 3D, so it covers a volume instead of just being a 2D texture. And then I moved some of the attributes around so it looks kind of like smoke, which you can see in the sample there. And then in this time attribute here, if I break the connection, let me delete this. As you move this around, the noise kind of just evolves over time. So I have that automatically change with just a simple expression. So if I go frame by frame here, you can see the numbers slowly changing, going up. And you can see, it's kind of hard to see at this low rate, but the fog is evolving there. And then that just gave the effect of smoke, but at a fraction of the render time of having actual fluid in there. So yeah, it still adds to the render time, but it's not nearly as bad as full-on fluid smoke. So with that and the area lights here, the samples had to be really slow, or really low. Gosh, I can't freaking get my terms right. But yeah, so there is some weird stuff going on, but I guess it would have been better than having a little bit better looking renders without the smoke. I think the smoke really added to it. But yeah, he gets up. I mean, that's pretty much the most that's going on this scene, other than just, again, simple, straightforward animation. But yeah, he gets up. Whoop, runs over here. Actually, in this shot, you can see, as I mentioned, this volume primitive doesn't really cast shadows, just because the volumetric shadows are really what are the big factor that kills render time. But in this shot, you can kind of see as if it looks like it. That was kind of an effect I did in post to kind of make it look like there was a shadow there. So if you go back and watch it and look closely, you can see there's kind of like a dark area in front of him, which I think turned out pretty cool. I did it in a few other shots, but it's not really visible as much, except for in this one. But yeah, he turns around all nervously laughing, and then he's over here checking this one out. And yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for this scene here. Lastly, we have the death roulette video. This was, again, another fun one. These are all fun to make. This was a fun one too. This one actually was done super quick. I had a thing I had to go to Saturday morning, so I didn't even start animating. There was zero animation until I didn't start until Saturday around like 2 o'clock, 2 p.m. So all the animating was done in like an 10-hour period, pretty much.
Side of you.
I have the audio on here. It's a little bit loud. But yeah, this one was done super quick. But actually, this one actually I was able to have I had time for the highest render settings of the other ones. These turned out pretty. You can notice actually this one's 1080p. It's not true 1080p. It's actually just under, but with a certain render setting, you can get super sharp images, but like too sharp, and that way you can scale it up a little bit further and you get something that looks like it's the proper sharpness, I guess, if you will. So this one isn't true 1080p. It was rendered just underneath that. I think I have it now set to 720 because I was doing some test renders for thumbnails, I think. So it's on 720 now, but it was rendered at just under 1080p and then scaled up a little bit further. But yeah, so there's a lot of lights going on this. I was trying to go for a studio-y kind of light setup. So you can see we have like, I think 5 here. We got 2 spots on WAG and Syndicate, then a big light kind of covering the whole stage, a directional light which just covers the whole scene to give it a little bit of light, to give light to those areas that don't have any, and then we have a dim spotlight on sparkles as well. And I actually have lights on here, real-time lights turned on, so if I move this around you can see, because I was concentrating on getting these right. And even with all these lights, it still was able to render out pretty high settings. But yep, there isn't a whole lot for the sign here. Actually, this sign, I wanted game showy looking text, but I also wanted it to be pixely, and I wasn't really going to be able to find a font like that. So I took a high definition, a normal font, typed in Death Roulette, scaled the letters to their appropriate size, and this is all in Photoshop. Scaled it down so that it was super pixely like this to like 100 by like 25 or something. Scale it down so it got super pixely, and then in Photoshop you can create a work path from a alpha channel. So I converted the text into an alpha channel, then converted that to a work path, and then you can import work paths into Maya as curves. So if I actually go in here, just 1 second here. So you can import work paths as curves. Show curves. There we go. So we can see, there we go. We can see this is what came in from Photoshop, and then from there I could convert this to a plane, and then convert the plane into a 3D by extrusion, and then that ends up with this. So that was a process that went into that text. Sounds lengthy, but it's actually pretty quick. It took only like 10 minutes to get that text set up. And yeah. These just besides that, this is pretty much straightforward. Yeah, I'm trying to think, is there anything really... The part where the wall is exploding is actually in a different scene. So you don't really see that wall here. Because that was done with completely different render settings. And I talk about render settings a lot. I'll go ahead and look at, because I get asked that a lot, what render settings. They're mostly the same for between videos. There's slight differences, obviously, for each one. But I'll go ahead and go over my render settings, at least for this video, at the end. But yeah, I'm trying to think, is there anything else noteworthy here? They're just kind of doing their thing. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So for rendering, I render out usually render out 3 passes: the beauty pass, which is actually what you see here, then an ambient occlusion pass, which is just dark areas where objects are close to each other, and then a depth pass for depth of field. Rendering depth of field along with the beauty pass will take a lot longer. If you render out a depth pass, which is done in like 0 seconds, it takes like 2 seconds per frame for a render of depth. You can use an effect in Photoshop, or not Photoshop, After Effects, lens blur, I think it's called, and then you can simulate depth of field there, which saves a huge amount of time. It doesn't look as good as the true depth of field in Maya, but it definitely is good enough. It's hardly noticeably different. So, yep. And let me go ahead in the render settings. So with the 2006 update, which is what I have, the mental ray render looks a little bit different. But I usually use the mental ray. Actually, for some passes, I'll use the software render. Even sometimes, if I'm really in a time crunch, I'll use the Maya Hardware 2.0 render, which is the exact same as the Viewport 2.0 render. And that renders out things. I mean, I can play back in almost real time, so it's rendering out things super quick. But image format is OpenEXR, which contains all 3 passes in one file. Yeah, let's see, is there anything else? Usually rendering in 720 or 1080 if I have the time. Quality wise, this one is at, I think actually I rendered it at 0.5 as overall quality. Final gathering is on pretty much all the time at a pretty low setting. It's really hard to tell the difference between 100% and like 50%, so that's usually low. Filtering here by default is at 3.0. This is the setting, this is the attribute I would actually change when I was mentioning, when I said there's a render setting you can change so you get super sharp images, a little bit too sharp. I would actually set this to something like 1 instead. Again, I had this set to 2 because I was doing renders, I think, for a thumbnail. So that's why it's at 2. So for normal render, I would put it at 2, but when I want to scale it, I'll set it to like something like 1 or 1.5. And then if I were to use, sometimes I'll use sun and sky, not all the time. Definitely, obviously not for this since they're indoors. But yeah, that's pretty much the extent. I'm not really going to go into setting up each render pass just because that would be a whole nother video and a pretty long one at that. So this just gives you an overview of what settings I use here. And yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for this. So that's pretty much going to do it for this. If you have any questions, just comment or tweet at me or message me, whatever. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks for watching.